Hello everyone, welcome back. Today's story is from r/MaliciousCompliance. This happened when I was 15. My mom was, let's be real, she probably still is, a mentally, emotionally, and physically abusive narcissist. Some highlights are when she was teaching my twin sister and me to read at the age of 4 or so. It was around 2 a.m., and my sister was having trouble learning, so my mother's solution was to beat her with a sandal every time she got a flashcard wrong. Same thing happened when my mother had me transcribe an essay she had written to my handwriting when I was 7. Every time I started a letter from the wrong position, like starting a capital M from the bottom line, she would beat me with one of her Birkenstocks. This, too, happened later at night, so when I got too delirious from the exhaustion and pain, she would drag me by the neck and literally throw me into a cold shower to wake me up, so we could more easily continue the waking nightmare. When I was 13, I told her I wanted to live with my dad. They were divorced, and she told me she didn't care what I did after I turned 18. I later figured out that this was because the child support stopped at age 18. Anywho? Fast forward to age 15. Our relationship was, understandably, strained. We had guests, and she liked to use guests as a way of controlling our behavior through shame. It's easier to be an angsty teenager when your grown-up friends from church aren't watching and judging everything you do. This makes it easier for her to pretend to be a firm, but loving mother, all while slipping in sideways comments, like velvet daggers. Well, I decided I wasn't going to subject myself to the whole thing, and spent the day outside in the woods nearby. We lived in the mountains at the time, so it was less than 100 yards from the house. When I saw our guests had left, I went to go back inside. My mother, perhaps unhappy at being denied a day-long emotional abuse routine, told me I wasn't welcome, and that I should leave. My 15-year-old brain heard her words and knew that she only meant for a little while, but it also recognized that she failed to specify any time frame at all. So, I hiked a couple of miles to a friend's house and asked if I could spend a couple of days there. When my friend's dad found out that I was there and why, he was pissed and said I could stay as long as I needed. I didn't go home that evening, or the next. My mom became concerned and contacted law enforcement, to report me missing. This is a big deal for several reasons. We lived in the mountains, on a national park, so it was a very real possibility that I had been attacked by a wild animal, become injured while hiking, drowned, or been kidnapped. Nobody knew of my mother's abusive tendencies, or the squalor and neglect my sister and I lived in. Most importantly, the law enforcement was the local park rangers, with which she worked daily. La immediately contacted my dad's side of the family to see if I had turned up there, or contacted them. They promptly freaked the fuck out and came to my house with lawyers on standby. La then hired dogs to track my scent, and then everyone freaked out, because the dogs tracked me to a nearby river, where my trail died, because the dogs couldn't pick up any more scent. Over the next couple of days, there were people going in and out of my house, rangers, lawyers, my family, etc. And several noticed the overpowering scent of cleaning chemicals, but only the lawyer considered why a clean house would reek of chemicals. La started to canvass the nearby woods and neighborhood. My friend's dad came to me and asked if there was somewhere else I could stay. He told me that he wouldn't kick me out. He didn't want to have to lie to the police or let the dogs on his property. My friend and I figured we would just go camping for a week or so, but instead, I looked up my dad's side of the family and called, and they picked me up right away. Understandably, everyone had questions. When I told them what was happening, the lawyers, horrified, pounced. A judge issued an emergency change of custody and prevented her from gaining custody until she underwent a psychovalent therapy, which my mother would never allow. The rangers, equally horrified, completely shunned my mother, and she eventually lost her job. Since she was only allowed to live in the park because she worked there, she was kicked out of her house. My friend's father, and the trackers, were members of the local community and churches, and they too shunned my mother. She lost her job, her house, her church, and her friends, all because she told me to leave, and I did. I'm 32 now, this happened a while ago. Edit, I wasn't clear and didn't want to make it longer. When my dad's family got involved, they were able to reach an agreement where I would live with them for a time, but my sister stayed. I had to go back to my mom's for a short while, but the judge issued an emergency change of custody, and my sister and I went to live with our dad. My sister and I have been in therapy, and she is teaching now. Life isn't perfect, but it's better. Edit, people keep asking about the chemicals. The house was normal, trashed. My mother kept an untrained dog, and the carpet was soaked with dog feces and urine. The few times we had guests, we would have to crawl around the dog's potty spot, clean it up, and make the house smell good. My mom freaked out when she realized that rangers and CPS might come round. She did a deep clean of the house before reporting me missing, because she couldn't afford to have them realize what they were walking on. Next story. My first job out of school was as a language teacher in a private school, and it sounds like it's straight out of a fiction book. I was employed to teach grades 6 to 9. However, Because I was the only teacher for that language, the owner begged me to teach grade 1 to 5 when I had any time to spare. I wasn't paid for the extra work. I taught each of the classes I was employed to teach twice a week, and the other classes once a week. Aside from that, lunch duties were added to my work, so I hardly sat all day. The school had a preschool at a different location, and all the teachers there wore uniforms. The preschool workers, all females, were the only ones required to wear uniforms. I was the only female teacher on the grade 1 to 9 staff. One day, the owner calls me to her office and asks me why I'm not in a uniform like the preschool staff. I tell her no one informed me about wearing uniforms in my department, and also, the male teachers do not wear uniforms. She gets slightly angry and orders me to sew one with my own money. I try to protest, but I see there's no way of getting through to her. My parents convince me to let it go and sew one. When she sees me in the uniform, she goes off about how figure-flattering the uniform is on me, tells me I'm trying to seduce the boys, and calls me a prostitute. She orders me to sew a new one or don't come back. My uniform was not short, way below the knee, didn't show cleavage, nor was it tight. I ignored her, and she fired me a week later, while I'm in the middle of a class. I just packed my stuff and left. The next day, the principal calls me to tell me the owner is asking why I didn't show up that day. Duh. You fired me. She calls me herself and orders me to come back to work, talking about how do I expect the kids to eat lunch. Good luck finding a donkey like me to work for that pittance. I went back, though, but not without double my pay. I then quit the next month. Next story. Back in 2015, I worked for a pretty dismal call center. It was an outsourced center that handled customer support for a lot of UK retailers. Staff turnover was really high, with the vast majority being on temporary contracts. The promise of a permanent contract was hung over people's heads to make them suck up being treated like crap. After working there for about 2 years, in late February of that year, I was offered a permanent contract, because they wanted to put me on their team leader program. The pay was slightly better, the job security was better. The only major difference was how holidays were handled. People on temporary contracts were paid for any unused holidays at the end of the working year in April. People on permanent contracts had to use their holidays, or they would lose them. I had just over 3 weeks holidays saved up. So, the day I accepted, I booked 3 weeks off in March so as I wouldn't lose them in April. March rolled around, and my manager told me that my holidays had been refused. I said, that's fine. As long as they pay me for them, and he replied, no. If you don't use your holidays, you lose them. I said that I was trying to use my holidays, and they were not letting me. He shrugged, said, it's the duty of the employee to manage their holiday time wisely, and I should read my contract, despite the fact I had only gotten that contract 3 weeks earlier, and the holidays worked differently. Understandably annoyed, that evening, I went home and read my contract from beginning to end, and discovered my manager had overlooked one crucial part of the paperwork. The contract clearly stated I had to give a week's notice, and that any holidays not used would be paid to any leaving employee in full, on their last paycheck. The next day, I came into work and announced I would be quitting unless paid my holidays or allowed to take the time off, and if they accepted my notice, then to be sure my holiday days were included in my final paycheck. My boss asked me if I was really going to quit over this, and I replied, was he really going to lose one of his most reliable employees over this? He wouldn't budge. I assume he thought I was bluffing. So I handed in my notice, and on my leaving interview, my manager's manager made sure to explain exactly why I was leaving. And yes, my final paycheck did include my unused holiday days. Next story. So, I was granted a legal name change a few months ago. Long, boring story as to why. Simply put, hated the unique spelling of my first name and wanted to ditch my surname. Didn't have much trouble updating my name most places. Social security, driver's license, insurance, yada yada. No bumps in the road until I got to the very last thing to update, my credit card. I use this particular credit card a lot. I'm self-employed and use this card to rack up travel points for flights, hotels, rental cars, etc. However, if you've ever checked into a hotel or picked up a rental car, you'll know the name on the card must match the name on the ID. So, I call the CC company. I'm told I have to fill out a certain document and mail that in, alongside a copy of the court document. Fair enough. 2 weeks go by. I hear nothing, so I call again. They say they haven't received it. I'm then informed they have a fax number that I can use to send in the documentation. So, I fax in everything necessary using an app on my phone. Another 2 weeks go by, still nothing. I call again. Same spiel on the other end of the phone, please mail or fax. You get the deal. I once more did what they asked. Yet another week passes. I call. Again. Told the same damn script. I'm starting to get annoyed by this point. I have an upcoming trip planned and need the card to match my ID. So I asked to speak to a manager. They give me some BS about a manager not being currently available. Anyway, I fax in the document and court order once again. However, this time I decided I was just going to keep hitting send after the previous one had shown as delivered. I thought I'd repeat the process a few times, just to make sure they got it. After sending it 25 times the first day, I got no response. The next day, I was sitting on my couch, watching football. I thought I'd send the fax a few more times. By the time I realized how many times I'd hit send, I had sent it over 130 times. The very next afternoon, I got a call from a manager at CC Company. She sounded quite angry over the phone. I just played dumb. You guys asked me to fax it in. I got my updated card in the mail 3 days later. Next story. Throwaway because it'll be easy to find my real identity. In 2008, I was involved in a federal lawsuit when my rural Texas high school tried to suspend me for wearing a shirt supporting then Democratic hopeful, John Edwards. Hindsight is 2020, they said it was a violation of the dress code, which was only ever selectively enforced. My parents had my back and agreed that it was, to quote my very white dad, redneck cracker nonsense. I'll never forget, during the initial meeting, when my principal called in a school board member. He said that if I got suspended, I would probably get kicked off the football team, and that could hurt me getting into college. It didn't matter, I was a miserable player and a smart kid, so it wasn't gonna be what took me to college. But the slimy, fake concern, as he tried to leverage my future against my speech, is something I'll never forget. Anyway, as the case goes on, the squeeze gets tighter. First, they have the football coaches try to get me to drop it, having the football coaches talk about how my selfishness means that they can't wear Fellowship of Christian Athlete shirts anymore, trying to embarrass me in front of the team. I'm a fat kid who openly plays Magic, the Gathering in high school, hit me with your best shot, I have no shame. Next, they host a meeting with all the teachers, telling them I'm a problem, and that they need to keep an eye on me in case I slip up. I found this out years after the fact, when I bumped into my English teacher at a friend's wedding. Finally, they just start pulling in students from my classes to get them to say bad stuff about me. I was a class clown, so this turns into every single dirty joke, rude comment, or loud fart I ever made getting reported to school administration. Which then leads to this awful little toady vice principal calling me and my parents in and reading them back, in front of my mother. That one stung. My parents still knew it was bullshit, but who wants their locker room jokes aired in front of their mom? They used this as a pretext to expel me for 6 weeks, citing inappropriate sexual conduct. They shoved me into the disciplinary alternative education program, and I am fucking steaming. The program is basically where they warehouse kids with emotional problems they can't handle. You just sit in a room in a refurbished insane asylum and can't do anything but read or use the computer for monitored educational purposes. You also get booted from extracurriculars while you're in there. I know, at this point, they want me to make a scene so they can punish me further. So, I do the exact opposite. I channel all my rage and new free time into my school work, doing homework I would usually ignore because I knew I could ace the test. Now, I'm doing both, and my GPA is climbing. I start looking into scholarships and find a bunch that are really interested in political activism, and guess who now knows a little bit about that? I apply and rip my school a new asshole in every one. Then, I work with my dad and we find an attorney who will take our case pro bono, which means while the school bleeds fees it doesn't cost us anything to keep it in court. I spent those weeks like a monk, motivated entirely by spite, doing everything I could to make their bullshit work for me. I got out. I got back on all my teams and ended up applying for a prestigious honors program at my dream school. Not only did I get in, but I got way more financial support than I thought I would. Eventually, we lost the case, but the school had to abolish the dress code anyway because they couldn't afford to get sued over it again. I don't like the idea that a school lost money, but, man, they made the choice. They could have backed down whenever. Now I've graduated law school, am taking the bar in 2 weeks, and already have a job investigating government corruption. I'm getting paid to be a pain in the ass of petty authority, and it's pretty sweet. Edit, thanks for all the awards. To the many people who have expressed concerns about my docs, it would be more or less impossible for me to talk about this story without doxing myself. I have no other social media, and I'm completely comfortable being linked to this story. Therefore, I am largely unconcerned with the information being out there. I'd rather share the story than live in fear of some truly motivated maniac committed to targeting me. Next story. Someone's story about their friend wearing a skirt to school and getting bloomers reminded me of my own malicious compliance in high school. Way back in 2013, I was a sophomore in high school, and there was a tradition that on Fridays, the cheerleaders, football players, without their pads, of course, band members, and the other groups performing wore their uniforms to class. This wasn't a written tradition, and only the cheerleaders and dance teams' uniforms broke dress code. Nobody really batted an eye to it. I wasn't a skirt person, but I liked dresses once in a while, sorry. As one can tell by my user, I grew up in Texas, and it's still significantly hot in August/September. So, one time, while wearing a casual sundress in September, I was pulled out of class and reprimanded because the end of my dress was 4 inches above the knee, when the dress code said no shorter than 2. I pointed out the cheerleaders and dance teams' uniforms every Friday, and how they reached mid-thigh at their longest, but was told it was okay because students can wear official school uniforms. And was sent home to change. Clearly, somehow, someone had forgotten I was on the golf team. Immediately, my mind was turning to the next Friday. The school had recently upgraded the golf team uniforms the year prior, and the girls' team uniforms consisted of a short-sleeve collared polo shirt and a skirt. If you don't know what a skirt is, it's essentially a skirt and short shorts combined. It looks like a skirt, but they essentially act like built-in bike shorts. And these fuckers were short, I'd argue shorter than the average cheerleader skirt. So that next Friday, about 3 days later, to my parents' surprise, I was ready to go that morning in my golf uniform. As compared to taking a bag to keep the clothes in to change into after school. But I just said, Fridays, we can wear our uniforms to class, and they accepted without question and took me to school. Well, by second period, I was sent to the office yet again, and the first thing the assistant principal asked me was why I would deliberately disobey her right after our last conversation, and threatened, in-school suspension. I'll never get anywhere in life by not listening, yada, yada, yada. When I finally had a chance to get a word in, I said, but this is my school golf uniform. And I pointed to our school's logo that was sewn into my polo shirt. You said students can wear official school uniforms to class. Why are the cheerleader uniforms okay, and mine isn't? This isn't even a skirt, it's a skirt. It has pants. I still remember how pissed off she was. She stared me down for what seemed like a millennia. Then, she snapped and told me to get out of her office and go sit in the lobby area. That I knew what she meant, and she would be calling my parents about this blatant disrespect. So, I waited and played on my iPod, and chatted with the nice secretary, trying to keep myself distracted, because, in reality, I had been really trying not to cry. I had massive anxiety when it came to authority, but I still had my naive sense of injustice, and I didn't just want to let this go. After about 20 minutes, she popped her head out and, in a very monotone voice, told me I could go back to class and to let teachers know I had gotten permission from the front office to wear my uniform. Then she went back in and closed the door before I could even think to respond. I spent the rest of my day dealing with teachers questioning me about my outfit, and 1 or 2 calling the front office to double-check my claim that I had, in fact, gotten permission. I went to practice after school as normal before being carpooled back home. My dad met me at the front door, with a small smirk, and I asked him, what in the world happened? Because I knew he was the go-to contact for my school, so I knew she called him. He explained that when she called and tried to get him to come to the school and get me, and talked about punishments for my insubordination, he immediately began to argue with her and admitted he raised his voice quite a bit, asking why I wasn't allowed to wear my sport uniform that the school provided to me as a dress requirement at my golf practice, and mentioned taking this all the way to the school board and resolving this obvious favoritism. He then asked me not to do that again, but that he was proud of me, and told me, I know I had told you never to start a fight, but to always fight back. I always thought physically, but you damn sure took the advice. Edit, I'm sorry for hurting my fellow 20-somethings with the reminder that 2013 was 8 years ago. Please, don't look for gray hairs in the mirror for too long. An even deeper apology for my 30 to 60-year-olds, who I offended even further with my edit. Edit 3, I do actually need to clear something up. The band did not wear those heavy wool uniforms to school, they had their own custom shirt/nice pants combo. The directors were apparently really strict about all the band kids wearing it every Friday. Also, sorry to my 30-year-olds for grouping that age range. Sorry to my 60-plus for not mentioning it. Those responsible for sacking those who are responsible for the edits have been sacked. Next story. When I was doing my articles at a small law firm, internship to be admitted as an attorney, I was the go-to person for everything at the office, setting up computers, buying stationery, paying bills, going to court, seeing clients, etc. After being admitted as an attorney, I continued doing all of this because the secretary only did about 20% of what a secretary would usually do and refused to do anything else. My boss does some shady business, don't pay taxes, etc., so he couldn't just fire her for fear of her ratting him out. He also never disciplined her. We are not in the US. Since we worked from my boss's mother's house, the secretary also spent about 50% of her day just chatting to his mother, and they became fast friends. Guess who was always the evil one that everyone ganged up on? Yours truly. I was made out to be incompetent at my job, and I used to cry a lot. I almost became an alcoholic from work stress. One day, the secretary got really upset with me. After I asked her to buy stationery, since we didn't even have staples, and after a heated argument, she told me that I'm not the office manager and should stop lording it about as if I was. Bear in mind, I was her senior, both as an attorney and in number of years worked at the firm. My boss did nothing and, rather, got upset with me, and so did his mother. I decided, there and then, I am done doing both secretary work and my attorney work, because I was working roughly 50 to 60 hours per week, standard is 40, trying to get everything done without receiving overpay. The unemployment rate in my country is around 30%, and in the legal field, the supply of lawyers exceeds demand. She knew this, and my boss knew this, but no one cared that I was basically working myself into an early grave. Cue malicious compliance. If everyone agrees that I am not the office manager, then I will stop managing the flow of the office and only do my attorney work. I stopped paying the bills, buying the stationery, reminding my boss of important meetings, etc. Within 2 weeks, the electricity was cut off for 10 days because it wasn't paid, and my boss's elderly mother, along with the rest of his family, had no electricity. We could also not work for those 10 days. Once the electricity came back on, the phone lines were cut due to non-payment. We could again not work. The post piled up, there were no stationery. We couldn't do service of court documents, because our service providers cut us off. It went on for weeks. I simply worked around the issues and sorted my life out. One example? When the Wi-Fi was off, I used my cell phone to hotspot my laptop, without telling anyone. In the end, my boss and his mother begged me to do what I used to do, but I refused. Since I was focusing more on my actual work, my fees increased, and my pay increased as well. Shortly thereafter, I moved away from that office to our secondary office and worked alongside lovely colleagues, who all did what they got paid to do. I've been at this new office, same firm, just a different location, for the last 2 years. Next story. So, when I travel by plane, which happens about 2/3 times per year, I'm usually quite conscious about the weight of my luggage, because of how much you have to pay if it exceeds the limit. This time, I put a bit more stuff in, because of gifts, but I thought I was fine. I pass the police and get to the check-in, where a woman in her late 30s/early 40s, who reminded me of my old history teacher, indicated for me to proceed. I give my passport, do the usual stuff, and I put my luggage on the scale, which shows 23.05 kilograms, the limit being 23. I was quite pleased with myself while looking at it, thinking I got it just right. But, no. The woman tells me I need to pay €50 for excess baggage. I look at her, confused, telling her it's 50 grams, surely, it doesn't matter. She repeats herself, and we start arguing until she says, either you pay €50 or you somehow make the luggage 50 grams lighter. I didn't have a carry-on, so I couldn't take anything with me. At that moment, I remember the 200 grams of chocolate that are sitting in the luggage, and I start smiling. I open the luggage, take the chocolate out, and start nibbling at it, with a grin on my face, while looking at the woman, who goes from Pikachu face to annoyed. She tells me to hurry up, even though I was the only one in line, so I offered her some, and she just stared at me. I ended up eating exactly a quarter of the 200 grams, and, lo and behold, the scale showed 23 kilograms. The woman gives me my ticket while glaring at me, and I tell her to have a good day. That's it for now. See you in the next post.